Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holowchak, a Ukrainian American historian and philosopher. And I want to welcome you to another episode of Eye on Ukraine. And in a prior episode, I talked about Vladimir Putin's political philosophy, in as much as he could be said to have a political philosophy. And today I want to talk a little bit about, follow up on that. This will be part three in that series on Vladimir Putin. I want to talk about Putin on the Couch, a psychoanalytic interpretation of Vladimir Putin. And I'll say a bit too about why it is important to do such a thing. Many people have done the same with Donald Trump on the internet. It's very common for American psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists to talk about some of the pathological aspects of Trump's behavioral patterns, Trump's personage. It's not so commonly done with Vladimir Putin. Putin is a very private, strongly inaccessible person. And one can only get at him, I think, obliquely. At least that's the thesis that I'll be defending today. That when one watches his videos, read the sorts of speeches and essays that he writes, for example, on the historical identity of Ukrainians and Russians, one can access this deeply personal person, this person who is essentially a KGB person and is trained in not allowing people to see too much about who he is, because of course it could be dangerous for him in the long term. Anyways, dissembling, keeping things from other people is something that Putin is well trained in. So to get at a sort of psychoanalytic understanding of Putin, we have to go at him somewhat obliquely, not directly. Now I'm going to use for sources his biography, his Russian sanctioned biography, first person, an astonishingly frank self-portrait by Russia's President Vladimir Putin, as well as certain talks, certain episodes that we have on video and on the internet that I think are quite relevant and revelatory of the sort of person that Putin is. Now, why is this important? It's important because if we're going to understand, if we're going to try and negotiate a treaty of a ceasefire, a treaty of peace with Vladimir Putin, we need to know who this person is. We've already seen his political philosophy. He is sort of unbendingly committed to capture all of Ukraine and presumably more than that after he's successful with Ukraine, if he's successful with Ukraine. So there we got at an understanding, a sort of intellectual or quasi-intellectual understanding of the sort of person he is philosophically in terms of who he is as president of Russia. What is his aim? And I call that muscular militarism. Today, I'm going to talk about key psychopathological concepts, as it were, that define Vladimir Putin, his titanolatry, his sadism, his Napoleon Complex, his pleonexia, and his Sardanapalianism. Some of these are terms with which you're probably not familiar. I'll explain them as I come to them. First, his titanolatry. Titanolatry really is a desire to have power and to exercise it. Go back to the Greek Titans and Zeus's war with the Titans, the Titanomachy, the war that he had with his father and his uncles and so forth, right? So the titanolatry is a desire to have and to exercise power. At least I'll define it that way. When Putin was a young man, he was unabashedly a thug. He was not afraid to admit that. And he said one of the ways he got out of thuggery was to practice judo and sambo, right? These were, sambo was a sort of mix between wrestling and judo. And these activities he's enjoyed because they were brutish in nature. They were very physical and violent in nature. Karate, he couldn't abide, he said, because it was a lot like ballet. What he means by that is that there wasn't enough throwing and beating and physical contact. One of his quotes, he says in his biography, he says, sports were only sports if you had to shed blood and sweat and work hard. Okay. Now he says of judo, it's not just a sport, it's a philosophy. And by that, I think he meant that life is tough, and the way to survive the exigencies of life is to be brutal, is to throw or be thrown, right? He at one point says when he's talking about the rituals of judo, when before one encounters opponent, one bows, he says it could be done differently. Instead of bowing to your opponent, you could jab him in the forehead. Why he says that in his biography, who knows? Again, this is a very revelatory remark. Jab him in the forehead instead of bowing. Get the first blow. The idea here, it seems to me, is that prior even to the competition, one can gain the advantage by breaking with ritual and striking the first blow. Hadn't thought of that before, but I think that's what he's saying by that. We talked about in the last episode that when Putin comes to power in 1999 as prime minister, he is tasked with by Yeltsin dealing with the Chechens. And so he bombs the hell out of Chechnya, Grozny, their capital especially, and forces the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of Chechens. And at one point, he's addressed by one of the interviewers in his biography about, what about your life? Aren't you afraid of your life? Since one of the Chechens might want to kill you. He writes, one should never threats. It's like with a dog, a dog senses when someone is afraid of it and bites. The same applies here. If you become jittery, they will think that they are stronger. Now, when he entered the KGB, and at some point he would overrule the KGB, he learned many important lessons. And I think, what I said before, as his muscular militarism is really to run Russia just like someone would run the KGB, use the same tactics, the same fearlessness, the same sanguinary tactics that they used in the KGB. He learned a sense of family, I think, that the KGB is a sort of family, and that the people that he puts into his office, into his cabinet, the people around whom he functions will be family in a sense. He also learned the importance of minutiae, of details. He learned the importance of discipline. Very important, dissimulation, not telling people what's on your mind. Let them say what's on their mind, but keep your mouth shut. He learned patience. He learned perseverance until a task is completed. Part of the problem with the KGB is when you're given a task, you're expected to complete it. And of course, he learned the value of exuding, of oozing, and of exercising power. It's interesting to look at the persons that he acknowledges are in some measure heroes. And again, I need to be cautious here because he's not always explicit about telling people about his real heroes. First and foremost, he says in his biography, he notes that Napoleon Bonaparte is a hero. And they ask him about who are your heroes? He says Napoleon Bonaparte, and he qualifies that with a sort of nervous laugh. Very important when trying to understand who Putin is, because he's a master of dissimulation. He's a master of holding in his thoughts, his emotions. One has to get at him elliptically, as I said. So when he blurts out Napoleon Bonaparte is my hero, that to me is extraordinarily revelatory. Then he has the nervous laugh to suggest that he's not serious. This nervous laugh is equivalent to a qualifying remark, but saying, well, I didn't really mean that, which in psychoanalytic terms, and I think this is an axiom of psychoanalysis, it just means, of course I meant that. So we get at Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin very often by noting the qualifying remarks he says after he says something he wished he didn't say, at least in the manner that he does say it. He might have said something, for example, like, well, I really respect the discipline and the stick-to-itiveness of Napoleon Bonaparte. He doesn't say that. He says, my hero. Who are his other heroes? Joseph Stalin. He often says he is responsible, as were other Russians before him, for the re-Stalinization of Russia. Let's not cry about Stalin's misdeeds. Let's focus on what he accomplished. And the greatest deed of Stalin for Putin and other like-minded Russians is the Great Patriotic War. Russians lost millions of soldiers in the Great Patriotic War. They suffered the brunt of the losses, but they suffered most of the fighting as well. And Russians are wont to say, Putin among them, and especially, that without the war would not have been won, right? World War II, Hitler would not have been defeated. And so he's constantly referring to the Great Patriotic War to get young Russians to get some sense of identification with Russian identity. Other heroes were Tsar Peter, Peter the Great, Tsarina Catherine II, Catherine the Great, Alexander the First, all of whom were recognized for their military achievements and so forth. An instance of that when he had an office in St. Petersburg and all of his associates were putting up pictures of people with whom they admired on the wall. People, chose figures like Lenin, Kirov, and Yeltsin. Putin hung a picture of Peter the Great. He says in his biography about the exercise of power, very significant quote, one of which I include in my book. When I began to work as the acting president, I felt a satisfaction. Perhaps that is not the best word. Again, a qualifying word. I felt a satisfaction. Then he goes, perhaps that's not the best word. No, that is the best word. That's what he felt. In making decisions independently, knowing that I was the last resort and that a lot depended upon me, the responsibility was on me, yet I took pleasure in feeling responsible. What he's saying here, let's minus the qualifying remark, is that he luxuriates, as it were, in knowing that he is the final say, that people's lives depend on him, that people's fates depend on him, and so forth. One of the greatest illustrations of his titanolatry is his habitual tardiness, right? In 2003, he shows up 15 minutes late for a meeting with England's Queen Elizabeth. In 2004, he's supposed to meet with parents of children who are killed in an airplane crash. He shows up 2 hours late. How incredibly disrespectful that is. 2013, he keeps the Pope waiting for 50 minutes. In 2015, he's 80 minutes late for another meeting with the Pope. In 2013, again, he's supposed to meet with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. He shows up 3 hours late for the meeting. Angela Merkel, who was Germany's chancellor at the same time, he shows up for a meeting with her 4 hours and 15 minutes late. In 2018, he kept then U.S. President Donald Trump waiting for 45 minutes. Lastly, many of you are familiar with this incident when the telephone call between President Donald Trump, second-term president, and Vladimir Putin on March 18, 2025. Trump is an hour late. And there's a wonderful picture of him sort of smugly reacting to showing up late, to being late for the call and not being so worried about it. Now, he is also secondly known for his sadism, for enjoying other people's suffering and knowing that he's not suffering. I'll give you, he's known to be an inordinately cold person. We sometimes call this stoic sort of person. That's not quite right to capture because the Stoics believed in being relatively emotionless. They believed in keeping out the bad passions, and it was mostly because passions got in the way of rational thinking. Putin is just a cold person by nature, right? I offer a few instances of that. He says he calls himself not an ideologue, but a practicer, someone who practices, who acts. He says, I remained calm, even too calm. Later, when I went to intelligence school, he's talking about his KGB days, I once got an evaluation where they wrote the following as a negative character assessment, a lowered sense of danger. And he says of that, fear is like pain. It's an indication. If something hurts, that means something is wrong with your body. It's a sign. I had to work on my sense of danger. So he's admitting perhaps that he is perhaps biologically defective, that he doesn't have a sense of danger like other people, or he's stating this in some sense triumphantly, like, the things that normal people fear, I don't fear. I'm somehow superior in terms of management of my emotions. Um, I tend to think it's the latter. Now, another instance, when his dog Marina had been killed, his secretary enters his office to apprise him of the event. And she says there was zero emotion on his face. And so she goes, well, she assumed that perhaps he already heard about this. And she asked him about that. He goes, no, that's the first time I heard about him. So his dog dies and he feels nothing or he shows nothing. There's another incident he describes in World War I when his father and another Russian soldier were in a bunker, right? And they meet a German soldier, and the German whips out a grenade from his pocket, gets ready to throw it, and he does throw it at Putin's father and at the other Russian soldier, and injures the two. Putin sums the incident by, life is such a simple little thing, really. What does he mean by that in a situation where his father almost gets killed? Life is such a simple, really little thing, really. Very strange comment. There's another incident, and here I'll bring up some pictures to help us get by. He meets with Angela Merkel, and this is an instance of his sadism. This is in January 21, 2007. He meets with Germany's Angela Merkel, and she had admitted openly she had a great fear of dogs. And I just invite you to look at this illustration, this picture of Putin's dog, and the fear on her face and the delight in Putin's face that he takes in seeing or feeling her fear. This is not a picture of someone. He would just talk about the instance later, saying he had no idea of her xenophobia. He said, I just wanted to please her. Another instance that occurred relatively recently, early in 2015, is for fallen Russian soldiers. He had Russians deliver to the mothers of fallen soldiers electric meat grinders. It's a strange gift to give the mothers of Russian fallen soldiers. Half the time, these were soldiers that were identified as dead, obviously, so that the mothers had to be given the money that the soldiers were pledged as soldiers and so forth. But to give them electric meat grinders, I said this is a rather sort of ironic gift, given that his approach to battle tactics is called the meat grinder approach. We just send thousands and thousands of our soldiers up against the enemy and try to swamp and overwhelm them through sheer numbers. And in the process, thousands of our soldiers die. But hopefully, overall, we overwhelm our opponent, our adversary, and move on from there. Now, Putin also has an image of if I have a picture here of a very macho person. So we turn to his Napoleon complex. There are campaigns to bolster his image among the Russians as a super macho man. So I talk about the Napoleon complex. Napoleon complex. Not all these terms are necessarily psychoanalytic terms for defects of character, but they're nonetheless terms that apply to the sort of defects of character that Vladimir Putin possesses. Napoleon complex is someone who is small and slight, who sees himself as a large figure. smaller, slight, either intellectually or physically, and Putin is physically a small person. We know he works out, and he likes to have a lot of pictures of himself doing superhuman deeds. In 2011, for example, there's a picture of him in scuba gear that he emerges out of the Black Sea, and he's got two Greek urns that presumably, while diving, he found. Of course, these were planted to make him look like a great figure. Another instance, he's seen releasing a Bengal tiger that was sedated into the wild. Of course, the tiger sedated, no threat to Putin. See him not being afraid of a tiger. Another video shows him throwing a competitor in judo while he's in his late 50s or early 60s. Was holding up a large fish that sort of weighs a lot. And again, we have this image of him right here riding on horseback without his shirt and so forth, being macho. The idea is that every Russian man wants to be like him and every Russian woman wants to sleep with him, presumably. Uh, he also has a strong desire to be somebody, to be powerful. There was an instance in New Zealand in 1999 during Clinton's presidency, September 12th, and Putin in his biography recalls so with certain relish, and I want to relate what he says. Right, he's with Bill Clinton, and at some point they were seated. Clinton comes up to Putin, who's seated at a different table, begins a conversation, a short discussion, and he enjoins Putin to come away with him in a private room where they can talk. And Putin loved this. He was recognized. The little man was a big man. He says everyone lined up in a corridor, the leaders of other states' guests, and he, Clinton, and I walked together along that corridor. We exited the hall to the sound of applause. I appreciated the sign of special regard. Maybe that is why he made such a good impression on me. No, I'm just kidding around. Notice again the qualifying remark. No, I'm just kidding around, which means I'm not. He says maybe that's why he made such a good impression on me. And that is, he was someone at Russia being the largest country in the world, and yet the leader is not given due respect, and the country is not given due respect. Here, the US president, the strongest person in the world, presumably, picks out Putin as an equal, or if not an equal, someone who's nearly an equal, the two to go away and discuss some personal issues, diplomatic issues, and he was very much loved this. Another instance is occurred in 2005, and this was with Robert Kraft, and it deals with a Super Bowl ring. Robert Kraft and other American businessmen were in St. Petersburg. This is Putin's home city. In June 2005, he sees the Super Bowl ring on Kraft's finger, and he inquires about it. Kraft takes it off so Putin can examine it, and Putin just takes the ring and steals it. Kraft wrote later, he says, I took out the ring and showed it to him, Putin, and he put it on and he goes, I can kill somebody with this ring. I put my hand out, in other words, for the ring, and he, Putin, put it in his pocket. 3 KGB guys got around him and walked out. So he just took the ring. This is called Putin's pleonexia, taking things that don't belong to him. It's a sign of power. Some things he wants, right? And he wants them because they're both wantable in his eyes and because they're not his by right. That's what pleonexia means, wanting something that's not yours. All right. In the same year, 2005, he's at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York. This is September. He sees a glass replica of a Kalashnikov rifle, a famous Russian rifle, this large rifle, filled with vodka. He nods to his security people, his KG people. They take the replica. One grabs it, carries it out of the room. Simple as that. Okay, and we cover last his Sardanapalianism. Sardanapalus was a king who loved luxury, wealth, and the good and easy life. And Putin seems to love that as well. So Sardanapalianism is love of the good life, the easy life. Now he is walks around the time in expensive suits, the cheapest of his suits. He loves Brioni clothing, is 7,000 US dollars. And Brioni is also noted for dressing the various James Bonds. We talked of last time how Putin was very attracted to the early founder of the Russian KGB, one of the early great figures. He wanted to be like him, and he read spy novels all the time. So he wants to not only be like James Bond, he wants to be dressed like James Bond. So one might argue that his muscular militarism is a matter of bringing James Bond to the Russian presidency. And I don't think that's a bad argument. All right, let's look at another figure here. Let's look at some of his residences. He's got a residence on Valdai Lake that is worth over $1 billion. He has in it, he has a private cinema, bowling alley, and a church. His Dvorets Putina, this is the figure you're seeing now, is off of the Black Sea. It's said to be worth over $1.4 billion. It's nestled on 186 acres. The residence is now raised. I'll talk about that in a bit. It has an indoor theater, an indoor swimming pool, a casino, a outdoor pool, a hookah lounge with a pole dancing stage for strippers or so forth. Is this done for his gymnast girlfriend? Who knows? Outdoors, he has an amphitheater, a tea house, a church, an administrative building, an ice rink for hockey, numerous residences for the large staff to keep operative the dacha. Now, of the residents, there is a man-made harbor, right? So one in a tunnel underground that he can get to the harbor if he needs, if his life is on the line, he needs to escape onto a boat or something. And now the residence Dvorets Putina was razed to the ground. Let's see if I have a picture. I have a picture of that as well. But, the next one should be the indoor swimming pool. The figure of Putin is etched into the picture of this magnificent pool. The dacha there, the residence, the $1.4 billion residence that was so many, a few decades, a couple decades in the making, is raised from the ground. I think I have one more picture here. This is the picture of Putin's response when he goes to a telephone call in March with Donald Trump. And he keeps Trump waiting for an hour, and he's talking oligarchs in Russia, Moscow, and someone talks about the time, Vladimir, President Putin, you're going to be keeping President Trump waiting. Putin shrugs his shoulders, and this is his expression. Oh, so well, he's got to get used to it, or so forth. So that's who Putin is. If he talks of, let's go back to that scenario where Putin was so worried about Donald Trump dying. Right? He says, well, one has to, I'm worried when he got bullet just missed him. It scared me because I worried about my good friend Donald Trump. I worried about his life, and it's sort of funny that he speaks that way about his great friend, and he says went to the church to pray for his friend, right? And this is how silly that was, how meaningless that was. He meant none of it. It was just a political ploy to play down with Trump, to convince Trump that he really is a friend and so forth. And none of that is true. All right, say a little bit more about his Sardanapalianism. Now, some of these pictures we have of his various residences, he has some 20 or so private villas scattered all over Russia. and elsewhere, actually. And Boris Nemtsov and Alexander Navalny, we know about him, of course, are the people responsible for sharing some of these pictures of his enormous wealth. While the people in Russia are suffering egregiously, this person is wallowing in luxury. He has an expensive watch collection, well over $1 million. So both Nemtsov and Navalny were executed, presumably for exposing Putin to be the fraud that he is. Right? We know that today. Navalny very recently executed, 2024. Uh, he has some 20 or so private villas, some 58 private jets and helicopters, numerous luxury automobiles, 4 yachts, and I mentioned his expensive watch collection. Now, Putin is thought today to be worth $285 billion. If that's the case, he's the second wealthiest man next to Elon Musk. Let's say something a little bit before I end about his wealth and the average Russian's wealth. We know that Russia is suffering mightily with his great war. He is so addicted to continuancy of the war at the expense of Russia's economy. Russia will collapse, as I said before, because of this war. And it'll probably break up into several different nations or states, or different polities, because the economic woes that it's suffering right now. There's no way of coming back from them. Russia's economy is so devastated; it's moribund, and Putin knows that. Okay, so he's worth $285 billion. The average Russian salary is 750 US dollars a month. In Moscow, it is 1350 US dollars a month. But an apartment costs roughly around $1,500 a month. So, the average salary cannot even get you an apartment. And if you can get a reasonable apartment, how are you going to eat? And how are you going to afford a car and so forth? So you see that people have to sort of bundle together, as it were, to live. People have to live with family or friends in order to live. I mentioned before they can't afford to have children. Now, in rural areas, the average salary is 340 US dollars a month. People can't live on that. You can live on that if many people get. The minimum wage is 220 US dollars a month. Retirees earn 233 US dollars a month. What they did somewhat recently in 2019, Russia raised the retirement age from 65 to 60 to 65. The idea behind that is to force people to keep working for a longer time so that the state does not have to pay the retirement salary of $233 per retired person per month, saving them millions and millions of dollars, US dollars, by raising retirement age. It's a very clever thing because the average life expectancy of a Russian male is 67. If we wait till people are 65 before they get retirement benefits, a lot of those people will have died. So the state can expect to benefit handsomely. All right. There we have a summary of the psychopathology of Vladimir Putin. And this is tremendously important for several reasons. If we want to have any sort of diplomacy with this person who's so psychologically unbalanced, who is acquisitive, who loves wealth, who very cautious about saying anything about the person he is, a very private person, we need to know about the psychopathology of the person. There's nothing here that indicates that psychologically that indicates that there's any reason Putin wants to end the war, right? He cannot end the war, as I said in the last episode, without causing total destruction of himself. He is living a life of, notice how he destroyed this $1.4 billion Black Sea residence. Why? Very strange. Why not just, he was afraid that he would be caught in a drone raid and killed in his residence. Presumably, he'd like to spend a lot of time there. And but why destroy the whole residence? Why not just not go there? I presume the idea is that it was too well known that this was Putin's residence and he wanted to destroy any evidence of it. I don't know. The point here is that to affect any sort of workable diplomacy with Putin, we need to know the sort of person he is. We need to know about his psychopathologies. There are many: his Napoleonism, his sadism, right? He's a sadist. Trump thinks, I hope Trump watched that video that's on YouTube about the phone call that they were supposed to have, that they did have, and when he kept Trump waiting, look at his smart ass remark on that. Anyways, I'm going to look in a future episode. Actually, there'll be a fourth part to this. I want to look at the moral vacuity of Vladimir Putin, look at the religious and the moral aspects of Putin. Today, we looked at the psychopathology of the person. He's a very sick person, one who could give a damn about the Russian people. And if he doesn't give a damn about his own people, he certainly doesn't give a damn about anyone else in the rest of the world. That's important to keep in mind when we come to dealings with Vladimir Putin. Can't be trusted. His word means nothing, and he doesn't care about what happens to anybody except what happens to him. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this. TTFN, ta-ta for now, and we'll do this again shortly. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Like this, please, and share it.